Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information for your community or village by visiting us online, listening to NOAA Weather Radio or Marine VHF. You can do that anytime by calling 800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather line that you know and love. Grab a pencil or pen and write down the numbers you use to find your forecast and then just go a little bit faster the next time around. Find us on Facebook, where we're talking about the winter that seems to have forgotten Alaska, at least in south central parts this year anyway. We talk about the snow stats today and how that compares to the record-setting year of 1985 and 86, and also previous years in the 50s, where snow levels for the entire season were pretty low. Well, at this point, we're rivaling that now for Anchorage. And if we get no more snow in the Anchorage area through the rest of the season, or even just a little bit more snow, the record will be set for the lowest snowfall of the season. So pretty impressive stuff, especially if you take it back to just about, 3-4 years ago, 2011, 2012, when we had the most snow. So a very highly variable set of 4 or 5 years as you look at it in south central Alaska. We share that stuff on Twitter and like to talk about it there as well using the hashtag AKwxTV. And of course, you can find that on YouTube. NWS Alaska, NWS Anchorage, and NWS Fairbanks will also give you your daily afternoon map briefings. You can get a sneak peek at the weather that's coming your way around your part of Alaska before we get around to the Alaska Weather Show, so try that out sometime. Here's the hazardous weather outlook there as we go into the eastern Alaska Range. A wind advisory continues as we head into tonight and early tomorrow morning. Strong and gusty winds, especially over the gaps, will continue there, some of those up over 45 miles per hour. So that will be noticeable if you're traveling through some of the higher terrain there. And something else that will be in effect that is not really a watch warning or an advisory kind of message here, but something to keep in mind is that this same wind that's pouring northward into the Middle Tanana Valley is going to have an impressive effect on temperatures across the Middle Tanana Valley and some of the surrounding highlands tomorrow. So not only will it be blustery at times, it will be dry, and it will be warm. Watch for those temperatures here on those on the high temperature map here in just a few minutes. I think you'll be impressed, especially if you're just waiting for springtime in the Fairbanks area. Well, let's go out west to the first couple minutes here. And as you look out to the west, in the YK Delta, across the central and eastern Aleutians, you're still under the influence of this Gulf of Alaska low pressure system sitting here. This is bringing the clouds in off the mainland and wrapping them around. It's also bringing the ice down. We've seen some of the medium growth ice here across the central and northern parts of the Bering moving southward fairly quickly just in the last couple days or so. And as of this point, and we'll show this in the sea ice map here in just a little while, the ice is about 20 nautical miles or so, the leading edge of that, about 20 nautical miles or so from St. Paul. So certainly some pretty quick movement southward from some of the more thicker chunks of ice there coming out of the central and northern Bering. In the meantime, across the northern Pacific, you've got this area of low pressure working just south of the chain. And this has got a lot of dry air wrapped up in it, and most of the active weather is still well south of the chain here. So this really not posing a whole lot of threat, but by the time it gets into the Gulf, it will re-energize what's going on over here. So let's go on over here. Here's the Gulf of Alaska, and you can see southeast, seeing some more moisture working northward, but it's getting pushed more into British Columbia. We've got drier air working up into the central and northern sections of southeast. Some waves of rain passing through, but nothing too unusual at this point. Another front will be working its way towards southeast, re-enhancing that option for rainfall as we go into the next couple days. In the meantime, the focus seems to be across the northern Gulf and south central and southwestern Alaska, where yet more low pressure systems are just sitting and spinning, and several of these just circling in on themselves. We were talking about this earlier this week and late last week and the week before. That pattern really has not changed much. as we have most of the focus on the coastal communities for rainfall. And a little bit further out to the west, we get back into the cold coming off of the mainland, out of the Bering Strait and off of eastern Siberia. And that's where you can almost see kind of a split right here. Well, that's about where we're seeing that rain and snow line. So that's sitting there and hovering across central parts of the Aleutians and westward. In fact, you can pick out the circulation around high pressure sitting across the Bering Sea. That's pulling in that colder air. And from that area westward, that's where we're picking up snowfall. A little bit of snow is going to set up across the lower Yukon Valley and the Delta into perhaps some areas of the south-facing Brooks Range slopes, as a little bit of a jet streak, a little bit of a faster moving part of the upper atmosphere is going to zip right over the north and western sections of Alaska in the coming days. So you'll see that here on the surface map in a minute. In the meantime, let's focus on what's going on right now. An occlusion is working northward, that frontal boundary helping to squeeze out rainfall around Prince William Sound, Seward, all the way down toward Homer, Kodiak Island, AKwx, down toward Sand Point, and westward toward Unalaska. Southeast also getting some pockets of rain there. Some of the higher rainfall areas probably just to the south of Haida Gwaii, not Heidelberg. Heidelberg's a little bit further up here. And then out across the interior, you're looking up around a trough of low pressure that's extending all the way into the northern parts of the Yukon. Things are pretty dry right here, but it is helping to draw that air up and over the Alaska Range. And as such, places like Fairbanks are going to be a little bit on the warmer side tomorrow. Out across north and western Alaska, watch for some snow showers there, some of that around the Seward Peninsula. And as we get into tonight, watch this trough of low pressure way high in the sky in the upper atmosphere. We've got more of a south and westerly flow zipping along that boundary. It might kind of encourage at least a little bit of snow. May not be anything too substantial, but in places that have been pretty dry for several days, and upon several days, it'll be a little bit of a change in the weather for you. High pressure sitting out across north and western parts of Canada and extreme southern British Columbia, helping to draw in moisture across northern parts of southeast and across the northern parts of the Gulf. And then you get back into our circulations there, around 984 millibars or so. And this is pulling in that colder air back into the central chain where we get a better chance of snow showers, probably some blowing snow around the Pribilofs today. And remember, that ice edge is only about 20 nautical miles northward, so that's also helping to allow that cold to remain in place and drop even further south as we go. Once again, watch this area here. There it is. There's the snow we were talking about for Friday, that southwesterly flow and the jet stream helping to kind of enhance the cloud buildup in those areas as we go into Friday. Some of that stretching from about Galena northward into places like Bettles. South of that, though, we're getting into more of a drier flow. So areas around Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley still in that warm southerly flow. That should help your temperatures jump into the mid-40s to as high as the lower 50s, it looks like, tomorrow. As you get into areas around Kodiak Island, probably looking at some light rain all the way down into the Alaska Peninsula, areas of showers around southeast, as you would expect, a ridge trying to encourage the next wave of low pressure coming up out of the central Gulf, that low down to 982 millibars. Snow showers coming off the YK Delta, some of those stretching all the way back into the central and western chain. Flurries around Barrow and some of the Arctic coast. Otherwise, things are very dry for you. The same goes for the northwest coast into the Seward Peninsula. Look for a little more sunshine as we get into your Friday afternoon. Here is a look at the weekend, and on Saturday, the next round of warm, well, kind of mixed up air, let's say. This is an occlusion, so it's not really cold, not really warm, just kind of all stirred up together in the Gulf. This is moving north and west toward Kodiak Island, toward Prince William Sound, toward southeastern Alaska, and with that we get another kind of push to start up the rain machine for southeast, and especially around Prince William Sound and Kodiak. Waves of low pressure are still rotating around this. The pressure center itself drops to 981 millibars, so the winds may pick up a little bit more out in the Gulf. Look for rain around Prince William Sound, but on the other side of the Kenai Mountains and the Chugach, you're looking at relatively dry conditions, mainly a mostly cloudy sky around Anchorage, the Cook Inlet, into areas around the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. To the west, spotty areas of rain and snow showers are possible. There's still enough cold for snow from the Yukon Delta northward again toward Bettles, maybe as far west as Ambler, and probably the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and maybe even the Arctic coast by Saturday afternoon. Things are just cold out across the northern Bering Sea and relatively dry for St. Lawrence Island. That should still encourage the ice to move a little bit further south. We'll keep an eye on that. And out across the central and western chain, it's rain and snow for Shemya and for areas around Kiska. Eastward, we start to get back into the rainfall as you head toward Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and Nikolsky. And that is the start of our weekend. So let's take a look at what's happening right now. Temperature-wise, 40s and 50s for southeast, 49 in Sitka, 51 as you head out toward Angoon and areas southward into the upper 40s for Petersburg. Heidelberg, Sitka, fairly mild today around Hyder itself. Here's areas around Haida Gwaii, just shy of 50 degrees. And up around Haines and Skagway, temperatures there were also just shy of 50 late this afternoon. Prince William Sound saw temps in the 30s and 40s today. Valdez was only 34, Seward 34. The reason it was so cold, well, it was raining there for a good part of the day. Probably a little bit of snow there as well. 44 in Yakutat, 49 in Homer, 45 in Kenai, and 40 on the Button in Anchorage. Up the road toward the Parks Highway, we go toward Talkeetna. Temps there in the lower to mid-40s throughout the day. 47 in Healy. Fort Greely showed 40 degrees. Northway was around 36 with Eagle at 43. The Middle Tanana Valley saw temps in the mid-40s today. Probably will be a little warmer tomorrow. And Fort Yukon's looking at 25 at 3 o'clock today. Arctic Village was in the teens. Anaktuvuk Pass also in the lower teens. Single-digit territory for most areas in the Beaufort Seacoast there as you get across the demarcation point and into northern sections of Canada. It was 2 below. West of Barrow, it was also sub-zero. We saw Wainwright down to about 1 below. Point Hope and Point Lay also closer to 0, but some colder spots there around the Chukchi Seacoast today. Kivalina was 3 above. Kotzebue 6 above. Shishmaref not reporting again, unfortunately, but on the other side of the peninsula, it was 17 in Nome. Unalakleet saw temps in the mid to upper teens. Galena was 26. Looked like Ruby is in the lower 30s. And Caltag was probably in the lower 20s for a good chunk of the day. McGrath, 38. Bethel saw temperatures there in the mid-30s there. Nunivak Island was 25. St. Lawrence Island in the teens. Southwest and Bristol Bay in the mid-40s today. Most of the Alaska Peninsula in the upper 30s and lower 40s. Sandpoint was 43. About the same in Kodiak by 3 o'clock. Mid-30s for the central chain, and for Shemya and Attu, it's about 32 degrees this afternoon with Pribilofs in the upper 20s. Now, overnight low temperatures probably aren't going to cool down a whole lot more than they did last night for many in southwest and south central Alaska. Looking at temps holding close to, if not a little bit above freezing. For southeast, 30s and 40s there. The interior in the mid-20s for most areas around the Tanana Valley, maybe a little bit cooler to the west in the upper teens. South-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, looking at temps in the single digits and low teens. Arctic Village about 1 below. The Arctic Coast from 5 to 20 below, though especially colder as you get out toward the Chukchi Seacoast there. Kotzebue Sound temperatures from 5 to 10 below, still cold, and 1 above for Nome. The Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta generally in the teens and lower 20s, 20 in St. Paul and 39 in Kodiak. Now for high temperatures tomorrow, look at that. That wind coming up and over the Alaska Range and then descending through the Middle Tanana Valley. That is going to be a heat machine for you. So plan on some melting, but plan on some refreezing though as you get into tomorrow night. If you're driving in and out or through Fairbanks, plan on some slick roads, especially after the sun goes down and things start to freeze up once again, because you know that will happen. Lower to mid 40s for south central. Kodiak back to 45. Looks like a mild day for southeast, also in the mid to upper 40s. As you get north of the Yukon Valley, teens and 20s there for the higher train of the Brooks Range, and anywhere from 5 above to 5 below for the Arctic coast. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse and all our friends working up there, 0, 20 in Nome around southwest, looking at 40 in Bethel. Nunivak Island 24, St. Paul 25, the Alaska Peninsula, Sandpoint, Cold Bay, False Pass, and everybody out there in the lower 40s. Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, 40-degree day for you. Lower to mid-30s for the central and western chain. Prince William Sound temperatures, including Valdez, should make it into the 40s tomorrow as well. Now here's flying weather. You'll notice IFR conditions for the northern parts of southeast, some of the higher terrain of south central, including Prince William Sound and around Seward, southward toward Kodiak Island and Kodiak itself. Otherwise, MVFR there for the rest of the island. Most of the Alaska Peninsula under MVFR. IFR conditions for the Pribilofs and some areas just inland from the Chukchi Seacoast in northwestern Alaska, and hit and miss really around the higher terrain of the Alaska Range and north of the Yukon Valley. Let's take a look at your pass conditions. Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass will likely lean over. Conditions will worsen for both passes there as we go through the daytime tomorrow. Heading for IFR, we expect. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will probably hold at IFR through most of the day. We've got more moisture working into the higher terrain, probably get locked up there. So watch for some precipitation and poor visibility and lower ceilings around Rainy Pass as well. For Windy Pass, expect conditions to improve toward VFR. Probably during the mid-afternoon hours. Isabel Pass will likely see some improvement, but after a start at IFR may only reach MVFR throughout the afternoon. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see that lean over toward MVFR conditions. Tanita Pass, probably marginal throughout most of your Friday. Portage Pass, we're going to call IFR, especially the eastern side, looking like it's going to be socked in through a good part of the day. And Chilkoot and White Pass, also going to list as IFR for your daytime tomorrow. Freezing levels show that warm air is kind of spreading out around the Gulf with several circulations of low pressure just kind of stirring all of this up here. We're not getting a whole lot of that warm air into the interior at this point aloft, but you can certainly see some effects of the surface temperatures we just saw. Anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 feet across most of southeastern Alaska, and that surface freezing line just keeps holding south right now, and it's now south of the Pribilofs and touching places like Adak and Atka in the morning. For icing potential, things are fairly slim. There are many areas along the Gulf that will see some light to isolated moderate at worst. Most of that is going to be a little bit higher up there, around 6,000 feet or above for south central and northern sections of southeast and western Canada. The Alaska Peninsula might start to see those levels drop off a little bit more. And as you get out toward the central Aleutians, you'll have to go above 5,000 feet, again for places like Adak and Atka up toward the Pribilofs. The jet stream shows that fast-moving river of air zipping right through north and western Canada tomorrow, and that will continue to hover right about here along the Yukon Valley between 50 and 60 knots. Got a ridge of high pressure across the west coast, and our very well dominating area of low pressure and that trough across the Pacific still in place there with wind speeds up to 160 knots. At 9,000 feet, here's our broad southerly flow, the ridge of high pressure coming up out of western Canada and North America extending into Alaska, keeping things pretty much status quo. For southeast, we have wind speeds around 25 to 45 knots. For the central and western Aleutians, those winds are coming out of the north, and that's going to keep you cold and keep that ice slowly creeping southward. Low pressure sitting just south and west of Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. Wind speeds there between 15 and 20 knots. A little bit of a shift eastward at 3,000 feet. You can see the circulation still pouring on that southerly flow across the Gulf, keeping the slop coming right up to the Gulf Coast in just about all locations all the way around the Horn. For southeast, 15 knots there from the south. On the north slope, those winds are coming in from the west and northwest, pretty light into the Brooks Range, and more of a north and easterly flow coming through Norton Sound, 15 to 20 knots there. Turbulence potential should be pretty limited then to most areas around the Gulf of Alaska and just to the north. As we've got that southerly flow coming over some of the higher terrain, you'll have to go below 6,000 feet to run into some chop, also in southwest and also across the central Aleutians, a little bit below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few minutes, we'll be back with your Ice Edge update and your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Three lunar eclipses in less than a year.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plow Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, outreach astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. Hey James, how does the man in the moon cut his hair?
I'm afraid to ask. How?
Eclipse it.
Oh, brother. This isn't going to be an astronomy joke episode, is it?
No, but that's not a bad idea. Instead, we're going to preview the upcoming total lunar eclipse.
Yes, and this will be the third total lunar eclipse in the past year. April 15th, 2014, October 8th, 2014, and the next one is this year on April 4th.
And this one will be number 3 in a series of 4 called a tetrad.
All right, let's show you.
Okay, we have our skies set to 4 a.m. on March 30th, 5 days before the eclipse, facing west. There you'll see the waxing gibbous moon setting next to a really bright star.
But that's no star. It's the king of the planets, Jupiter. You've probably been seeing Jupiter lighting up the evening skies as it rises in the east. When you get up early, and I mean really early, like 4 a.m., you can see him over in the west.
Let's watch the sky day after day and see how the moon shifts across the background stars. The moon will be here on March 31st at 4 a.m., getting closer to Leo the Lion's main star Regulus. Then the moon seems to hop over here by April 1st. Notice it's getting fuller.
A lunar eclipse can only happen during a full moon. So on April 2nd and 3rd, it gets fuller still. And on the morning of Saturday, April 4th, the eclipse is ready to begin. So the good news is that this eclipse will be on a Saturday.
All right, the weekend.
The bad news, for Dean here especially, is that it won't start until 6:15 a.m.
Oh no, another early morning eclipse?
Sorry, night owl. But there's more bad news. Where you live is a factor. Let's watch the eclipse simultaneously from Cincinnati, Ohio and Miami, Florida. As more and more of the Earth's shadow creeps across the face of the moon, the lower in the sky it gets. And at 7:11 a.m. in Miami
and 7:22 a.m. in Cincinnati, the moon will set before the total eclipse. Bummer. That means we'll need to travel west to see more. Let's fly.
To see totality, when the entire moon is in the darkest shadow of the Earth, you'll have to live west of the Great Plains. I'll watch from Denver, Colorado, while
I'll watch the action from Los Angeles, California. For both of us, the eclipse begins at almost the exact same time. 4:15 Mountain Time for James in Denver, which is 3:15 Pacific Time in LA.
At 5:57 a.m., folks around Denver will see the moon turn an eerie shade of red as the setting moon reaches totality.
While viewers in California see it begin at 4:57 a.m.
Totality will last just a few minutes, and then the Earth's shadow will begin to wipe away from the moon. A few minutes later, in Denver, the show will end when the moon sets still in eclipse.
While in LA, we'll see a little more of the eclipse until almost the last bit of shadow has left the moon. So the farther west you live, the more of the eclipse you will see.
2014 had 2 lunar eclipses, and so will 2015. This is called a tetrad, 4 lunar eclipses in 2 years.
And the first 3 are only seen in early morning. Why do they always have to be in the morning?
Dean's not a morning person. Well, good news, the 4th eclipse is on September 27th. It'll be visible in the evening.
Finally!
And even better, it'll be on the same night of the closest, largest full moon of the year.
The supermoon. Wow, a supermoon eclipse on a Sunday evening? I can't wait.
So set your alarms for the total lunar eclipse happening on the morning of Saturday, April 4th.
Remember, where you live will determine your view. So to find out what the eclipse will look like from your city, go to our website, www.stargazersonline.org. You know, we really do need to do a moon joke episode.
As long as you don't tell the haircut joke again. Keep looking up.
Now, if you pay attention to Facebook at all and listen to some of the information that we pass on from NWS Alaska, you probably heard something about the lowest maximum sea ice extent. Well, this is our extent right now. It may not be the maximum, but certainly isn't the minimum for the year. And right now, the extent is within about 20 nautical miles or so of St. Paul. So we're not having a problem with the ice right now, this day, at this time this year. So, you know, for what it's worth, that's a grain of salt there. And you can see that the ice is still pretty widespread across the Bering Sea. That thicker ice that I was talking about earlier on the northern flow is moving a little faster right around in here, according to our sea ice experts today. They're saying that this is still moving southward there, so with a very little change in the pattern, we would expect kind of the continuation of what we're seeing right now, and that means maybe some more ice is going to drop a little bit further south. So keep an eye on that, weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's the way it shapes up for southeast as we head into Friday. Winds around 10 to 15 knots, pretty much all areas on the inside and the outside. The outer coast running around 10 to 11 feet for the seas there. On the inside, 3, maybe as low as 2 feet as you head down toward Clarence Strait. Again, most of the winds from the south and southeast. For Saturday, a little bit of a change there, huh? Northerlies coming out of the Lynn Canal all the way down towards Stevens Passage and Frederick Sound, 25 knots, 5-foot seas on the inside, coming against southeasterly winds up through the Clarence Strait at 30 knots with a 6-foot sea. Across the outer coastline, you're looking at more of an offshore flow from the east, 35 knots with 15-foot seas from Yakutat all the way down to Cross Sound, and more of a south and southeasterly flow coming up towards Sitka from the Dixon entrance with 14 to 15-foot seas on a 30 to 35 knot wind. For south central, southeasterlies coming into Prince William Sound around 15 knots. Also looking at southeasterly winds coming into the Barrens around 25 to 30 knots. Northeasterly winds still light across the northern Cook Inlet, and still plenty of ice there across the north. 3-foot seas expected there. And south and easterlies coming across Kodiak Island at 25 to 30 knots. Looking for 7-foot seas in Shelikof Strait, 15-foot seas on the eastern side. And easterlies continue across the western Gulf and the north at 35 knots. 13 to 14-foot seas there. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound up to 25 knots. And 20 to 35 knot winds racing down Cook Inlet, with 5 to 9-foot seas in the sea ice-free areas, 11 to 12-foot seas west of the Barrens and into Shelikof Strait for your Saturday. For the Alaska Peninsula, 20 to 25 knots on the Bering side, 3 to 6 foot seas expected there. The Pacific side looking at 8 to 12 foot seas, the higher seas there from Castle Cape down to Chignik. A southerly flow up to 30 knots will do that. As we get into Saturday, a north and easterly wind through Bristol Bay. Seas still holding around 3 feet, 5 foot seas a little bit further down the coast with a northerly flow. Northeasterlies west of Kodiak Island becoming northerly as you head down towards Sand Point and King Cove with a 10 to 12 foot sea on the Pacific side. For the Aleutians now, we're going to see some changes as we go into Friday and Saturday. North and easterly winds across the eastern chain, 20 to 30 knots there with higher seas as you get into the central and western chain, 9 to 10 foot seas on the Pacific side, 11 foot seas on the Bering side, and northwesterlies will change there as we get into Kiska and Attu, 15 to 30 knots. And as we get into Saturday, southerly winds return as warmer air is backing into the western part of the chain, 20 knots there. Otherwise, northwesterlies continue for the central and eastern chain. 25 to 30 knots on the Bering side, 20 to 30 knots on the Pacific side with 10 to 12 foot seas, and for the Bering Sea coast, 8 to 10 foot seas expected as you head into Saturday afternoon, again with that northwesterly flow. For the west coast, northerlies coming out of the Bering Strait, 15 to 25 knots, a little bit stronger around the Pribilofs with a 9 foot sea on a 30 knot wind. Northeasterlies coming out of the Kuskokwim Bay with a 3 foot sea. As we get into Saturday, not a whole lot of change for direction. Speed diminishes somewhat across the central Bering, still holding around 15 to 20 knots all areas, 25 knots for the Pribilofs with a 7 foot sea. Now for the north coast, an easterly flow coming out of the Beaufort, 15 knots there. Northeasterlies coming down the Chukchi Sea coast and into the outer Kotzebue Sound region, 15 knots there. As we get into Saturday, look for a north and easterly flow. Pretty much all areas. The winds come up a little bit more in the eastern Beaufort to 20 knots, and otherwise a northeasterly flow outside of Kotzebue Sound at 20 knots for Saturday. Recapping tonight's weather, we're still watching for some strong and gusty winds across the eastern Alaska range. Watch the gap areas especially. You may see some gusts on the order of 40 to 45 miles per hour. Nothing too out of the ordinary for you. And a warmer day in Fairbanks with temperatures back in the mid-40s to low.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.